what have the politicians been doing Bulgaria for, let's say, roughly the last 10 years? They've been working overtime to try to get rid of the leva and switch to the euro. The political class is not legitimate. The U.S. actually invaded Cuba, Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Dominican Republic, Nicaragua. It annexed Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico became a territory of the United States. And the Americans stole a piece of Colombia and established a new nation, Panama, so we could build the Panama Canal. By the way, the Europeans should be very happy if the U.S. took over Greenland. Russia wants what? They want a permanent peace treaty. And that's what will happen. And believe me, there are plenty of CIA operatives and U.S. CIA assets in Bulgaria. And so the British intelligence, MI6, and all of that activity, that's all Russophobe.
I'm not offended, but say something to these losers here in Sofia.
Well, most Bulgarians are on my side. The minority of Bulgarians are losers.
Yeah.
The minority. The majority are winners.
Yeah.
And I'm with the winners. even though I've dismounted from my Bulgarian horse because I think it's dead, but that's in the political realm. But as far as Bulgarians go, I think the majority has the right view.
Europeans are losers. Hello, my dear Professor Hанке. Hello.
Hello, Martin. Good to see you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. How are you?
I'm perfect.
But we are not perfect. We are already in the rich club. Do you know where is the rich club? Europe and the euro. Rich. We are very rich and happy. This is my last Bulgarian leva banknote.
Well, I have one of those mounted in my office at Johns Hopkins University. Only I have an ancient lev note, a one lev note, a little tiny.
Yeah. I want your forecast. What will happen to me, my team, my business, my small business? What will happen? You're the specialist.
I think the following. You're really asking what will happen after you switch from the lev to the euro.
Yeah.
The big thing that is, let's go back to the history of the thing a little bit, because, of course, I am the father of the currency board and the one who saved the lev. And what have the politicians been doing Bulgaria for, let's say, roughly the last 10 years? They've been working overtime to try to get rid of the lev and switch to the euro. And in doing that, of course, every government has fallen. They fall like flies. And you have tremendous political instability. The political class is not legitimate. The governments are not legitimate in Bulgaria because almost no Bulgarians even vote. That's a sure sign that there's no legitimacy. There's no support for the politicians who have done this to the Bulgarians. And every survey that you see, the Bulgarian population, they're against switching from the lev and going to the euro. That has led to tremendous amount of instability in Bulgaria, and that instability will just continue. And that's my forecast. There'll be new political parties, new political coalitions, new resistance, because the Bulgarian population, there's something called resentment, the word of resentment. The Bulgarian people, they resent the politicians because the politicians ignore them. And the question is, well, why do they ignore them? And one reason, of course, is that and I know this even from when back in the old days when I was President Stoyanov's advisor, there were many Western companies who wanted to invest in Bulgaria, and they trusted me, and they would tell me of all the corruption and payoff required before they could get approval for the investments that they wanted to make in Bulgaria. And some of these, by the way, I've been on 120 hours. This is all documented. I knew about it firsthand because why? Because I was the only guy in the government that anyone trusted. And they would come to me and tell me, oh, I can't get this privatization deal going because every time I visit Sofia, I have to pay the minister of privatization $10,000. And I'm not allowed to do that. And in the American law, if I did that, I would really be in trouble in America. So the forecast is that things will, in a way, stay the same. They'll stay corrupt. They'll stay unstable. The population is very distanced from the political class and very resentful of the politicians. And so the governments will keep falling, turning over, but there'll be new political groupings. I can't predict what they will be, but there definitely will be new political groupings. So that's it's the same old story in Bulgaria.
If it's so, send the troops like in Venezuela. Send the troops here.
Well, I'm not for that kind of thing at all. But if you know what I mean, the problem is that Bulgaria, by joining formally the Eurozone, they were in it with the Bulgarian currency board. They were de facto. They were in the zone because the lev was a clone of the euro. But now they've gotten rid of the lev and they're formally in, and they've lost their autonomy. The Bulgarians have given away a piece of sovereignty, basically.
We know this, but we're unable to stop this. Let's speak about Venezuela. How do you define the arrest of the president of Venezuela by the U.S. authorities? Isn't this a huge violation of international law?
Okay, before we do that, let me end up with one final remark about the currency board. So it's very interesting that the power that the political elite have over the press is total in Bulgaria. I was never interviewed in the last year on the subject of the lev, except I've been on your program.
Yeah.
Obviously, they don't control you, but the press and a lot of these people I've known for years, by the way, they went radio silent.
Yeah.
Once it looked like the euro was coming and was a sure thing, there was no interviewing. The only good interview, I sent you this, was released on Monday by the respected central banking journal in London. They did interview me because they know I'm the father of the currency board and the lev and so forth. But that's it. So the press, the freedom of the press is, I would say, essentially zero in Bulgaria.
We know this.
Okay, so I'm not telling you anything new. I know.
Yeah.
But I'm confirming what you already know and what most Bulgarians actually know. Let's go to your question about Venezuela, though, and the legality of the Saturday military maneuver to kidnap President Maduro and take him from Caracas to New York, where he's in jail right now. So there are two aspects to this. One aspect is American law and precedent, and by American law, this is completely legal, and it's not the first time this kind of thing has happened. We have something called the Monroe Doctrine. in the United States. President Monroe in 1823 gave a speech and laid out the Monroe Doctrine. And the original doctrine said it was opposed to the colonial empires in Europe establishing colonies in Latin America. That was the original thing. So it was focused on Europe and European colonies. And the doctrine said they will stay out of Latin America. The U.S. will use force to keep them out of Latin America. Then in 1904, there was something called the Roosevelt Corollary that was added on to the Monroe Doctrine. And that's Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, the Rough Rider. And the Rough Rider, the corollary, basically said that if you read the fine print, it said that the United States owns Latin America. So it was much broader and much more aggressive. Think of it this way. Latin America is all the sovereign nations in Latin America are vassal states of the United States of America. That's what the corollary said. So what happened from 1904 until 1930, 600 times the Americans sent the U.S. naval fleets into ports in Latin America using gunboat diplomacy. And what they would do, the Americans would say, either you do what we want you to do, or we're going to start opening fire with these guns in the port. That's the gunboat diplomacy. In addition to that, most people don't remember, but from 1904 to 1930, and I'm just giving you a little snippet of history here, the U.S. actually invaded Cuba, Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Dominican Republic, Nicaragua. It annexed Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico became a territory of the United States. And the Americans stole a piece of Colombia and established a new nation, Panama, so we could build the Panama Canal. So the reason I'm going through this history is that precedent sets the state legal stage for things in the United States. So the precedent is clear. This is legal. Doing this in Latin America is legal, given American law, given the U.S. Constitution. If anyone brought a case opposing the kidnapping of President Madiru, the Supreme Court in the United States would never hear the case. So that's a U.S. law. Now, let's jump to the question you asked. You said, well, what about international law?
Yeah.
And it's clearly illegal under international law. But the point is that there's something called anomie, a word out of the Greek. And anomie simply means that if there's a law and you're practicing anomie, you just ignore the law. So when it comes to international law, especially the major powers, they accept the international law when they want to, and they ignore it when they want to. So they practice anomie. It's international law is essentially kind of meaningless. So that's what we have. And at the same time, remember, we've had Trump not only with Venezuela, but when he first came to office, he threatened to take over Canada by imposing punishing tariffs on Canada, and he would just take it over. And this weekend, right after the kidnapping of President Madiru, Trump again brought up Greenland. He said, we need Greenland for security purposes. So the U.S. is going to take over Greenland from Denmark. So that's the state of play, if you will.
You believe that Trump will take Greenland from that?
Well, he keeps saying, he keeps bringing it up, and the rationale is national security. The U.S. needs it for national security, and as Samuel Johnson once put it famously, the rationale of using the security argument to do something is the refuge of scoundrels.
Yeah, but because of this reason, national security, maybe Trump want to take Beijing.
Well, that's not going to happen because the Chinese have a formidable army. The military is quite strong, and we don't want to get tangled up with that. Remember what's going on with the U.S. and China now. Remember, Trump was going to put all these tariffs on China and wipe China out. Well, it turns out China has lots of secret weapons that it can use, and one of those is critical materials, the rare earths, for example. Mm-hmm. If they cut the supply of the rare earths off, the whole West collapses. By the way, the Europeans should be very happy if the U.S. took over Greenland.
Why?
Because the Europeans keep saying national security. We have to get in a war with Russia. They're inflicted with what's called Russophobia in Europe.
Yeah.
If you follow the logic of the arguments the European Union makes and the Europeans make, and their animosity, their Russophobia that they have, they should be 100% for the U.S. occupying and taking over Greenland for national security. Because the national security argument, it's all about Russia. Greenland is all about Russia.
There is a theory that if Trump uses Venezuelan oil, he can keep the price of oil around $50 per barrel, which will make it harder for Putin to win his war in Ukraine. Is it true, this theory?
No.
No.
It's nonsense. Right now, if you look at the production of oil in Venezuela, which it happens I know a lot about, because let me remind you, I was the chief economic advisor to President Caldera in 1995 and 1996 in Venezuela.
You're the right guy.
I'm currently the chief economist for the opposition in Venezuela. So I'm keeping up in real time what's going on. Plus the fact, talking about oil, in 1985, I was the first one, this is on record, you can go to the New York Times and find it, the first one to indicate that OPEC would collapse and the price of oil would go below $10 a barrel. And I was, of course, trading oil. So I know a little bit about oil. Actually, we were at Friedberg Mercantile Group at the time, where I was operating as a chief economist at the time, and now I'm chairman emeritus of Friedberg's. But at the time, I was a chief economist, and I developed a model, and that was the basis for predicting the collapse on OPEC, and it did collapse, and the price did go below $10 a barrel, and we had huge short positions on oil. We had 70% of all the short interest in the London market in oil. So we had massive short positions on. So that's some background and, shall we say, some credentials that will support what I'm going to tell you about this theory on Venezuelan oil. PDVSA, the state-owned oil company, has a depletion rate each year of 1/10%. 0.1%, 0.1%. Now, what does that mean? That these resources that they have, the reserves they have, are the world's largest. They're greater than Saudi Arabia's, by the way. And at that depletion rate of 0.1%, it would take over 400 years for the oil, half of the oil to be lifted out of the reserves and sold in the market. Now, at any discount rate, these resources are essentially worthless. So they have a huge amount of resources. They don't exploit them because they don't have the infrastructure to do it. They don't have the technocrats to do it. And to compare it to a normal major oil company, the depletion rate for Exxon is 8% per year. on the reserves that Exxon owns. And that means that over half of the resources will be exploited within less than 10 years for Exxon. And that means at any kind of discount rate, those things have value. The resources have value. So the idea Venezuela is a big player and important and influencing the oil market is just nonsense. They're producing less than 1 million barrels a day. That's less than 1% of the total oil production in the world market, and it really doesn't amount to much of anything. Furthermore, I happen to be very bearish on oil. That means I think the oil will continue to go down in price. And the reason for that is if you look at the incremental demand, the increase in demand each year that's coming in to the system, like for 2026, all of that increment, all of that additional demand can be met by producers that aren't members of OPEC plus. Point number one. Point number two, OPEC plus has a huge amount of excess capacity right now. So there's oil all over the place. And the oil price is going to continue to drift down. But it won't have anything to do with Venezuela.
You're the right guy. You were the chief. We know you were the chief of economic advisor to President Caldera. But now, what is the state of the Venezuelan economy under Maduro today? What will happen with the economy of Venezuela?
The current state of the economy, it's a complete disaster. I measure the inflation rate every day. I have a way to do this. And the inflation rate, it's the highest one in the world, 923% per year. So that's inflation. And if you look at the state of the economy, the gross national product per capita in Venezuela, since 2008, that was a great financial crisis, it's shrunk by 63%. So the place is a complete basket case. And the oil production, I mentioned, they're producing about 900,000 barrels of oil a day. At the peak, they were producing about 3 million barrels a day. And the reason for that, of course, it's a classic socialist operation. They don't maintain the capital equipment, so it breaks down, and that means they have to shut down. It's not safe. They have a lot of injuries. So if you have a lot of injuries of the workers, you got to shut down. So there are many days when they're not producing because of shutdown.
I'm curious, sorry, but one more question for Bulgaria. Do you know our percent of inflation today for last months? Because we see a little interesting things here in the shops and in the banks.
Well, off the top of my head, no, and part of the reason for that, I don't know the exact number. I can't remember. I saw it and I remembered, but this relates to my engagement with Bulgaria, and that is I follow an old Dakota American Indian mantra, and the mantra is if you're riding a dead horse, you better dismount.
We know this.
So once I realized I was riding a dead horse in Bulgaria, I dismounted. I have many other things to do. I'm fully engaged in Washington, D.C., where I'm advising Team Trump on the dollar strategy, what we should be doing with the dollar. We're talking about Venezuela. I'm engaged there. I'm engaged in Argentina. I'm engaged in Lebanon. So there's just one crisis after another going on. And what do? If there's a crisis, they call a money doctor.
Yeah, you're a money doctor. But if you're a money doctor, say me, is it good to buy dollars now? Is it stable, the dollar? Because dollar is going down in Bulgaria.
No. The dollar, no. The answer to that is no. I'm not a full-fledged bear. I'm not short the dollar. But it is still high, very, and probably overvalued. I think the fair value, the most important price in the world, actually, in foreign exchange, maybe in anything, is a dollar-euro exchange rate. And I think that I've thought for a long time the fair value is between 120 and 140. And what is it today? It's about 117, almost 118. So it's still high. It's on the dollar's still on the high end. It's been losing value a little bit. In fact, it lost quite a bit last year, the dollar. But the thing is, it had overshot. It was very overvalued. Now I think it's still mildly overvalued, and if I think it's mildly overvalued, where do I think it's going? I think it'll get a little weaker.
Let's go one more time around America and Trump. In Alaska, Trump and Putin, they divide the world. There is theory in Sofia here. We believe that in Alaska, Trump and Putin, they shake the hands and they divide the world. The Western hemisphere is American, the Europe and Eastern hemispheres will be Russian. Maybe this is stupid theories, but I ask you.
I don't think that's what they were talking about. I think they were talking about ending the war in Ukraine and on what terms they were going to end it. And it turns out that they made an agreement. And the agreement was consistent with the demands that Russia has. And the reason for that is that Russia has won the war.
Yeah.
In the battlefield, Russia has won. That's the end of the story. But it gets more complicated because, and part of the deal was that the United States would stop directly selling arms and providing intelligence and things like that to Ukraine, and the thing would wind down. Well, there's a problem because although the Defense Department in the United States has been passive, that part of the agreement has been agreed to. But the Central Intelligence Agency has continued doing what it's been doing since the start of the war. All the drone operations in Ukraine are run by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. Yeah. So this puts Trump in a difficult position because he comes off. Putin knows he's lying. So and that's why every time it looks like they're moving ahead and with some agreement to stop the war, it doesn't stop because the Europeans intervene, and whatever the plan is, the 28 point, the 20 point, they put mud in the soup. The Europeans want to keep the war going. Trump does not particularly want to keep it going. Trump would like to have it stop, but the Europeans want to keep it going because if it stops, the agreement and the treaties, the peace agreement, not ceasefire. The Europeans want to ceasefire. That would be a temporary thing.
Yeah.
Russia wants what? They want a permanent peace treaty, and that's what will happen. The only agreement will be the one that the Russian dictates because the Russians have won the war. When you win a war, you lay down the terms. The losers don't lay down the terms. And the Europeans are losers, and they want to keep the war going. Now, why? This gets into the politics in Bulgaria. Why? Because they know if there is a peace agreement, they will come out as the losers, and all those politicians will be losers. And that's why they don't want it to stop. If it stops, there will be an agreement, and it will contain most of the Russian demands because the Russians have already won the war, and they might even win more if this thing keeps up. I mean, the southern flank, it looks to me like if this thing keeps up, they might even take Odessa, and that means the Black Sea. So there's what we have. The Europeans, you say, well, why do the Europeans want to keep the war going? Why do they want to continue to see Ukraine be destroyed by Russia? and ground up by the Russian media. Why?
Why?
And it's very simple. They don't want it to stop, because if it stops, the Russian politicians will have something on their plate, and it will be called a loser. You lost.
Europeans are losers. This is very important for me.
The European politicians are very, like the Bulgarian politicians, very, very corrupt and very, very weak. Very weak. Name one leader. You could name a few, maybe in Eastern Europe. You know, you've got the Czech Republic now. They've got a new prime minister. I think he's pretty strong. But that's a tiny country that it doesn't really make that much difference. So the big powers in Europe are weak.
You said before that Trump is not a president of peace. You say Trump is a president of war. Let's develop this thesis. This is your thesis. What will happen in 2026?
Well, there's going to be more. Now, if you say the president of war, you first have to identify, well, what are the weapons of war?
Well,
and one weapon is tariffs, okay?
Yeah.
That's a weapon of war.
Yeah.
If you impose tariffs on somebody, you're going to war with them. If you impose sanctions, which are similar to tariffs, that's a weapon of war. And there are sanctions all the time, okay? And the third thing, what about military blockades? That's a weapon of war. We've got a huge chunk of the American fleet, naval fleet. It's in the Caribbean, off the coast of Venezuela.
Yeah.
And by the way, what did we do? We just invaded Venezuela. Now, we did that overtly. Covertly, the CIA is all over. They're all over the place. Involved in covert activities. And believe me, there are plenty of CIA operatives and U.S. CIA assets in Bulgaria.
Who is next? Maybe we, maybe Cuba, maybe...
Well, that's Trump's already said this. I mean, this is not secret. That the one thing about Trump, to his credit, he's very transparent. Yeah. He says what's on his mind. He wants to take Greenland, and he's repeated this as late as this weekend, just 3 or 4 days ago.
But that will be the end of NATO, if they.
Of course, that will be the end of NATO. But so what? As long as Pax Americana is on the throne, that's all that counts. And why do you think now, to show you how weak the Europeans are, why do you think the Europeans, they come and bow to the altar of Trump?
Because they are losers. They're
losers. You got a bunch of losers there.
Yeah.
And by the way, if you look just at economic numbers, it's a disaster in Europe. Very low productivity, low growth, all the budgets, not Bulgaria because you've had the currency board, but all the budgets are in terrible shape in Europe. Yeah. Of the big leading countries, they're all a complete disaster. And in France, by the way, it's a little like Bulgaria. You have one government fall after another. Now, why is that in France? Number one, it's because Macron is very unpopular. He's very weak, and he's a Russophobe. So if you're a Russophobe, the European population, most of them, they don't like it, except in the Baltics, of course, the population in Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia,
Poland.
The population, they're all Russophobes, so they like it, but not in France, by the way, and not even in Germany. The Greens, of course, are Russophobes, but the rest of the political class are really not. So they have a weak chancellor. He wants to continue warfare with Russia. Same in France. Same in the UK. UK Starmer is very weak in the UK. Even though they're not in the European Union, they're in fact in reality part of Europe. Now the Russophobe thing, by the way, I studied this in some detail. And the origin of that, it's British. That's where it comes from, Britain.
Yeah.
And so the British intelligence, MI6, and all of that activity, that's all Russophobe.
Somebody says that Trump will not end his mandate.
You never know, but I think it's a highly speculative, unfounded premise.
Okay. Say something to Bulgarians. Say something. Hey, Bulgarians, you're losers because you're Europeans. You say Europeans are losers, that means I'm a loser. I'm not offended, but say something to these losers here in Sofia.
Let me first of all let me point out a statistical fact. I never allow my students to use average, because an average tells you nothing. Yeah. You have to look at the distribution. So there's a high and there's a low.
Yeah.
And so in Bulgaria, most Bulgarians are on my side.
Yeah.
If you look at the distribution, the minority of Bulgarians are losers.
Yeah.
The majority are winners.
Yeah.
And I'm with the winners. even though I've dismounted from my Bulgarian horse, because I think it's dead, but that's in the political realm. But as far as Bulgarians go, I think the majority has the right view, and I've always believed that, by the way.
But the journalists are not on your side. You know this very well. The journalists.
Oh yeah, the journalists. I don't hear from them. They've gone radio silent. Yeah. This is what's called self-censorship, but it doesn't bother me a bit.
Yeah.
They're losers too. They lost the opportunity to talk to the father of the currency board, who actually knows much more about it than any Bulgarian.
Yeah.
I can guarantee you, I know much more about why it was formed, how it was formed, and how it's operated than any Bulgarian.
Yeah.
And by the way, fortunately, as a result of that, some educational institutions, including the Bulgarian Academy of Science, know that, because I have honorary doctorate degrees from 3 Bulgarian institutions. And why? Because of the father of the currency board.
You must know something for Bulgarians. We are waiting. We like to wait the wind of change to go through our hair. You understand? We're waiting. Yeah.
Yeah, we're waiting for spring, and I would simply say to my message to the Bulgarian people, which is different than the Bulgarian politicians, of course. I wish them a happy New Year, and I know when's the Orthodox Christmas? Now I've lost track.
No,
what's the date?
In 24th of December. This is like Catholic.
Okay,
in Bulgaria.
Okay, so you've had it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll wish them a belated Merry Christmas.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for this conversation. We will call you because we expect our elections here. After 2 months, we will have elections. This is my forecast.
Yeah. So, and just to clarify, although I've dismounted from activity in Bulgaria, I do follow what's going on, and I have followed a little bit the sticker price inflation problem. And the only thing I can say there is that it's clear to me, and I told you this on an interview we did, that the inflation data were being manipulated in Bulgaria.
Yeah, but that's why I want to know from you.
They were manipulated, and they were manipulated so that you could pass over the inflation hurdle and qualify to get into the Eurozone formally. There's no question about it.
Yeah. Please.
And if you go back to one of our early interviews, I told you this.
Yeah, I remember. Please write me an interview with some data for inflation in Bulgaria. Please, I will put it in my site.
Okay, I'll send you a note. As you know, I send you regularly
Yeah.
my interviews and things, but I'll make a note on the Bulgarian inflation.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Thank you.
This points out an interesting fact that I've always thought, by the way.
Uh-huh.
Even going back to the days when I was Stoyanov's chief advisor, and that is the many Bulgarian people, or ordinary people, are a hell of a lot smarter than the Bulgarian politicians.
But why it's like that? I don't understand.
Well, I understand, because the politicians control the levers of power.
And medias.
They control, and now the media. In the old days, for example, that wasn't the case. You know where the name Father of the Currency Board actually came, where it was first published? It was in Trude. Trude used to be the leading paper, and it was very high quality. They had high quality people that were reporting there, and very reliable, and people that I trusted and so forth and talked to. But that's where the adage Father of the Currency Board, it was first published in Trude.
We know this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you one
Great
more
to
time.
be with you.
Be healthy.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, my dear professor. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Be healthy. Bye.
Oh, be healthy, yeah. Well, there is a Bulgarian saying, I think, and it's something like, I wish you health and a long life, or something like that.
No, we say na zdrave. That means be healthy with this alcohol. Na zdrave.
Yeah, okay. That's another corollary.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.